have a better system for this. Okay. No. Portland, Oregon lies within the traditional homelands of the Multnomah, Oregon City Tumwater, Watlala, and Clackamas Chinooks, and the Tualatin Kalapuya peoples, who were relocated to the Grand Ronde Reservation under the Kalapuya Act of 1855, a ratified treaty, also known as the Willamette Treaty of 1855. Today, these tribes are part of the Confederated Tribes of the Grand Ronde. The Grand Ronde people continue and maintain a connection to their ancestral homelands and maintain their traditional cultural practices. Good evening, everybody. My name is Marcia Mack. I'm the Assistant Director of Galleries and Exhibitions here at PNCA. I am the curator of the exhibition just across the hallway that we're all here to celebrate, Warp Speed, Contemporary Conversations in Fiber. This exhibition features 5 Portland-based artists, one of which is Carolyn Hazel Drake, who will be speaking shortly. And they are in conversation, in contrast, with works from the Historic Museum of Contemporary Craft collection that they'd identified to be included in the exhibition. So I hope you'll get a chance to check it out if you haven't already. The exhibition will be up through October 26th, and it's in conjunction with Portland Textile Month. We've had some incredible programming so far, including a lecture with Josh Sin, who is here tonight, as well as a community activation called Trans Stitchin' with Michael Espinosa, who is also here tonight. We also will have a panel discussion with all 5 artists happening on October 15th, and then a tufting workshop with Melissa Monroe on the 18th. That is sold out, but there could be more. So tonight, we welcome the multifaceted talent of Carolyn Hazel Drake. Carolyn Hazel Drake is an artist and art educator based in Portland, Oregon, and Phoenix, Arizona. Her work is rooted in craft practices of textiles and ceramics and was shaped from an early age, working behind the counter at her mother's quilt store. She studied English literature and architecture at Portland State University's Honors College and spent a term as a curatorial research and writing intern for the Smithsonian American Art Museum. She has an ME, a Master's in Education in Art Education, and spent a decade as a high school art teacher before moving to K-12 arts administration in Oregon school districts. She served on the Portland Art Museum's Teacher Advisory Council for 7 years and has been awarded several residencies and grants, including the Glean Residency, the Sitka Center for Art and Ecology Residency, a month-long residency in the archives at Arkosanti, and the Icelandic Textile Center Residency. In 2024, she was awarded a Center for Craft Teaching Artist Cohort Grant. Her work has been shown across the Pacific Northwest. Drake is an assistant teaching professor for art education in the School of Arizona at Arizona State University. Please join me in welcoming Carolyn Hazel Drake.
Thank you so much, Marcia. I really appreciate the introduction and all of you for coming out tonight. I've been back for just a few days and will be here for a couple of weeks, and I just feel so fortunate that Oregon is shining on me with the most perfect fall weather. So I hope you all have been able to savor it as well. Thank you to, and a warm hello to my live streaming viewers. I know that some of my students are potentially hoping to get extra credit by watching this evening. I'm so excited to talk to you about this work, and I just feel so honored to be included in this show. The name of this talk is The Intimate and the Expansive, and I really thought a lot about the kind of framing for this work and for the conversation tonight. So the piece that I've made for this exhibition is Ghost Rose 1, and it's a piece that's made out of a reclaimed headboard, a hand applique and machine patched quilt, and I think we've got a close up here, porcelain beads that have been knotted together, and then a braided cord that includes leather and cloth and horsehair. And so I just wanted to kind of introduce this piece as kind of where we've arrived at the end of this process of making. And as I was thinking about how to talk about the story of this piece, what came to mind was what I've been working with my students on. So I have these wonderful art education majors, and right now we've been elbow deep in trying to figure out how do you ask questions that actually lead to learning. And so what I've been really pushing them on is this idea of where do you want to guide the learning, and why does it matter that there should be some deeper or more meaningful why behind whatever it is that you are asking your students to do with you. And so I wanted to apply that same lens to this talk. And what I came up with is these 5 themes that I've loosely sequenced in a way that I'm hoping. I was telling Marcia earlier that this talk feels a little bit like the first pancake, like I know what I'm saying, but I haven't ever sequenced it like this before, so we're just gonna see how well it lands. So the first of these themes is embeddedness. And what I mean by embeddedness, first off, is just I'm a 3rd generation Oregonian, and I'm just like so of this place. And in the same way that I didn't really understand the English language until I studied French, I feel like I didn't really understand how much I'm from this place until I left and went to the desert. So I'm a 3rd generation Oregonian, and I'm from a long line of makers, stitchers. My grandma sewed my clothes, and my mom had a quilt store. And then I raised my daughter here as well. So the 3 of us have done, I mean, on the right there is my mom showing my daughter how to improve her applique stitches. That learning is better heard from your grandmother than your mother. So I was very happy that my mom was always able to give her the critical feedback. But these 2 women have been a really important part of my creative practice. In addition to that, this is my favorite picture of me, the one on the left. This is my first year as a high school teacher. I'm 28 years old. I feel that I've come into my professional career already desperately late in life, that I've wasted my youth because I had my daughters so young and I was just never going to catch up. And I just look at those eyes and think you just have no idea what's coming for you. So 10 years of teaching high school later, and you can see the result here is there's a bit of patina that has emerged. The image on the right is one of my favorite activities of bringing students down to the Portland Art Museum. I taught first at Molalla High School for 5 years and then in the Silverton School District. So really getting a chance to be out in rural communities that despite they were only, within 1 hour of the city, most of those students had never been to the art museum. So really getting a chance to grow and learn as an artist and an art teacher with those rural communities. In addition to teaching high school, I was just really fortunate to get into the workshop teaching circuit at a pretty young age. It feels, it's a very welcoming community, and I have been teaching workshops out at Sitka Center for Art and Ecology for over a decade now. In addition to that, so this is, the image on the right is when you're smoke firing ceramics, you really got to get the plume going in order to know that you're going to have good results. So this is the sign, we've reached the plume. You can also see it's a characteristically wet afternoon at the Sitka Center. The other place that I spent a lot of time teaching was out at Creative Arts Community at Manuka in the Gorge. And this, similarly to Sitka, there are a lot of elderly students, or maybe that's not the right word, experienced students that also have patina. And it was such a really meaningful counterpoint to go back and forth from working with teenagers to working with folks that were decades, generations older than me. And so I just wanted to end this section of embeddedness by showing a couple works that are what I was making at that time. So I think of this time as when I was a novice, as a mother, as a teacher, an artist, and a human, and that I kind of just ended up throwing myself into all of those things simultaneously without knowing just how much I had to learn in all of those areas. The next thing that I wanted to talk about is material transformation. Better check my notes and make, had one more thing. Big shout out to Donna Guardino, RIP Donna Guardino. Her Guardino gallery was, I told you I was gonna cry, but she just passed away. And her gallery, if you didn't know it, on Alberta Street, was the launch pad for so many artists in the Pacific Northwest. And she would be willing to look at anybody's art. And she would tell you, this is good, but you have to get better photographs. Come back to me with better photographs, and then we'll talk. So she was super essential in giving me a shot at an exhibition early on, and I know that she was that for many other Pacific Northwest artists as well. Okay, moving into material transformation. The Glean residency, you heard Marcia mention it earlier. I know that she participated in it, and so did Josh. It casts a long shadow over the Pacific Northwest art scene because it is such a transformative and strange experience. So the Glean residency gives you the opportunity to spend 6 months with access to the Metro Transfer Center to see the waste stream. The thing that I think surprised me the most when I first went there is realizing how quickly everything moves in and out. I had this idea of like garbage is something that goes somewhere and then stays there. And the energy of all of this garbage being dropped off and then pushed and shoved up this conveyor belt and then compressed and sent into trucks that leave the city was just kind of mind-boggling. So on the left there is my trusty Fiat, Stevie Nicks, who was a hatchback, and so it was a very appropriate and useful artist car for loading in all of the treasures that I found from the transfer center. The thing about the transfer center is once you're pulling garbage out, you're saying maybe this isn't garbage when somebody thought that it was garbage. And I felt a surprising sense of obligation and weight associated with taking responsibility for that object and recontextualizing it. I happened to, for a very short period of time, have this surprisingly large studio space, and now looking back, I realized that was the universe smiling on me, so I would have somewhere to bring all of the doors and chairs that I was shoving into the back of my Fiat. So I really spent time with a lot of domestic materials like this cigar box full of pencils. Oh, speaking of a cigar box, I brought some things for you to touch and feel that relate to the piece that I made, so I'll just pass that around. Thanks. So this cigar box was full of pencils that were all perfectly sharpened. They were from all kinds of different small businesses and had been carefully kept in this cigar box that was covered in duct tape. And when I found this cigar box, it looked pretty gross from the outside, but I love me a cigar box. My grandfather smoked cigars, and so I always kept treasures in them growing up. So I immediately gravitated towards it. And when I opened it, just all of the hair on the back of my neck stood up because I could still feel the care and attention of keeping all of those pencils perfectly sharpened. And it felt so arbitrary that those were now garbage, maybe inevitable also. But as I was at the transfer center, what I was looking for were objects that did carry some of that spiritedness, that sense of care and use and love, even if they were ordinary objects. While I was there, I also found the headboard and the footboard, which is still behind our garage. That's a part of Ghost Rose 1, and it only took me 6 years to find a piece to use it in. Jane Bennett, who wrote Vibrant Matter, A Political Ecology of Things, when I read her work, it really said some things that I knew but didn't know that I knew. So I'm just going to read this in full. Why advocate the vitality of matter? Because my hunch is that the image of dead or thoroughly instrumentalized matter feeds human hubris and our earth-destroying fantasies of conquest and consumption. It does so by preventing us from detecting, seeing, hearing, smelling, tasting, feeling, a fuller range of the non-human powers circulating around and within human bodies. These material powers which can aid or destroy, enrich or disable, ennoble or degrade us, in any case, call for our attentiveness or even respect. And that kind of attunement to the spiritedness of inanimate objects, especially ordinary objects that are often found in domestic spaces, encountering those through the Glean residency really transformed my practice. Here are a few finished pieces that I made during part of that year. So this was the first time that I moved away from making individual objects, whether they were textiles or ceramics, and started to think in terms of mixed and repurposed media and object installations. The piece on the left was a moving blanket that I found at the transfer center, and it felt especially resonant with meaning. On the right, that piece is called bioremediation, and those are tobacco leaves made out of a roll of vinyl, white vinyl that I found, and old newspapers. So tobacco leaves, tobacco plants, can actually work to pull chemicals out of the air and the soil and can be used to mediate land. And I thought that that was fascinating when we consider also the way that tobacco is used as a pollutant, both of human bodies and the environment. This was also the beginning of my chair period. So I used the method Shosugiban of charring these chairs, blackening them, which also got black over a lot of other things, and then integrating woven, stitched, wrapped other materials. And they feel very ghostly, but welcoming. There was a certain point where I had too many of them, and one or two of them were kind of falling apart. So what I wanted to show was the pictures of when I chopped them up with my friend in our backyard and we burned them in the backyard fireplace, but I couldn't find the pictures. So I asked ChatGPT to recreate the pictures based on my description. I seem to have gotten a haircut on my way to the fireplace. I'm not sure what I'm doing to the chair on the right with the piece of wood, but anyways, you get the picture. So that also felt, when you make an object, then you're also responsible for the life it leads in the world. And so when is it time for you to actually destroy that rather than throw it away again? All right, ecological memory. So I wanted to talk about two experiences that I had. Leland Ironworks residency, which was shortly after my time in the Glean residency. And I want to give PNZA a shout out here because they were instrumental in creating and maintaining this residency, which I think was only for a few years, which was out at Lee Kelly's incredible compound in Oregon City, where his foundry is and where many of his sculptures had been installed and he'd been living for 50 years at the time that I was there. So I was there for the month of June, which is a great time to be in Oregon. And the difference between the beginning and the end of June is really incredible. So in terms of ecological memory, what struck me about living in this environment was the way that it was wild and very carefully cultivated at the same time, that there were ground hornets on the attack, but also just these really beautifully developed gardens, vegetable gardens and flower gardens. And you can see just the beauty of the integration of these large-scale sculptures with the light coming through. Lee Kelly planted almost all of the trees on this property. It was, he said one of the first things that he invested money into was tree starts because he knew he had to get going with that as quickly as possible in order for there to actually be tall trees within his lifetime. While I was there, this is the space that I was staying in, which was both austere and raw and also quite romantic. I did contribute the mosquito net because I have yet to meet a bug that doesn't want to bite me, and they were everywhere. The cat, the resident cat, we had quite a fling while I was out there, and he would bring me presents of murdered baby rabbits and birds and leave them in front of the door each day, which made me feel very complicated about our relationship. And so in this environment, which was really a kind of a rough shell with full-size windows on both sides, you really felt attuned to the day passing, to the season changing, certainly to the birds whose babies were hatching and they were getting more and more aggressive about you walking by the tree that their nest was in. And so I started doing work that was more connected to archetypes and symbols, and that felt both specific to place and also not so much about me in this moment, but any person in any moment. So it was one of these nights. I'm not a great sleeper. I was listening to the terrifying, let me make sure I get the title right, I'll Be Gone in the Dark, which is a recounting of the Golden State Killer. Yeah, and I was well into it, 3/4 of the way through, sitting by candlelight, having my like witchy little moment here. And I hear this noise behind me, and I turn around, and someone was trying to break in and I was like, who is this? It was Lee Kelly. He'd come down to ask if I wanted to come up and drink some wine with him on the deck. Besides the fact that, he was no spring chicken at this point, and it was late, but you don't say no. Of course I said yes, and so I had this wonderful experience, after he scared the bejesus out of me, but had this wonderful experience of sitting on this deck with him and hearing stories about all of the years that he'd passed in this place. These are a couple of the works that came out of that time and kind of started me down the path of using archetypal symbols, which continue to be pretty central to my work. The other part of ecological memory that I wanted to touch on was my time as a resident at the Sitka Center. You may have noticed there's a theme here, and that is residencies. Throughout all of this time, I have been working in K-12 arts education, for most of this time as a teacher, but by this point, working in district leadership. So it was the luxury of having that time in the summer that allowed me to be able to go to these residencies. Now, Sitka Center was the first one that really blew up my life because it was in November, which is a very important time if you're a teacher. But I was able to sneak my way into getting to do it anyways. So the Oregon coast in November it's not somewhere that I had spent a lot of time, as much time as I've spent at the Oregon coast, and it was so stormy and dynamic and changeable. Sitka Center is right on this estuary. It's right where the confluence of the Salmon River meets the ocean. And so the energy there is palpable, the wildlife, the tide coming in and out. It's pretty transfixing. And so it's also very isolated. And in November, it's quite isolated. So I had a lot of time, just me and the elk. There were a few other residents, but we were all kind of in our introverted headspace, and we had the place to ourselves. And I spent a lot of time just kind of sitting and looking and gathering materials and working at a very small scale, kind of responding to the quietness of the space with the quietness of smaller, intimate works. While I was there, this was a really good season for the Trailblazers, which is a really important part of my family identity with my mom. So my mom came out and spent a weekend with me, and we listened to a really epic Blazers game. Those are my grandmother's ashes that I'm holding on to as well. We brought her along because she's a hardcore Blazers fan. And so out of that time, too, of getting to share this space with my mom, I embarked on a series of funerary urns and altars that came out of that experience. The one on the left, I have a thank you at the end, but he gets a mid-credit or a mid-talk shout-out already. Mario Gallucci, who's worked with me as my photographer now I took Donna Guardina's advice seriously and never came back to her with photos that I had shot. So I started to work with Mario Gallucci, and he got that amazing shot of my head had just pulled out of the shot of blowing those candles out on the left. So here, too, in this case, let's see, this yellow phone, that came from the transfer center, as did that clock, and the clock in the right as well. So I found it really interesting, this idea of combining objects that take a lot of handwork, meticulousness, patience, that are craft materials, textiles and ceramics, and combining them with objects that are ordinary, that are machine-made, that are manufactured, but also that are old and patinaed and somehow can be in dialogue with those objects that have to be carefully crafted. And there's something in that interconnection that I find very revealing, or at least for me, very seductive. Okay. I guess the last thing that I want to say about ecological memory, and this I got to give a shout out to my good friend Adrian, who is a native plant restoration specialist for Metro, and I have learned so much from her about the language around plants and ecology. But in ecology, memory refers to the persistence of past states in a system: soil composition, seed banks, fungal networks that retain environmental history. And I see my work as functioning similarly, carrying forward past environments and histories through material and process and metaphor. All right, intergenerational practice. I know you thought I was going to bring up my mom and my daughter again, but no. We're going to talk about Marie Lyman, the mysterious, elusive Marie Lyman, who I'm wondering if maybe anybody who's watching actually knew. I did not know her, but was certainly active in the Pacific Northwest arts community in ways that I feel a very close kinship with. So this is the piece that when Marcia reached out and invited me to be a part of the show, I was like, but I'm just, what? Little old me, I don't even know. And then, you just have to sort of step into the role. So the idea of being in conversation with Pacific Northwest textile artists as part of this sort of legacy or tradition of this region, it feels like just incredible to be a part of that conversation. But it was Marie Lyman's tiny little JPEG as one of the many options that Marcia sent to us that we might want to be in conversation with that immediately stood right out to me. And if you haven't yet seen this piece, I really encourage you. It's the one that's up in the show, and it really bears looking at closely because it is quiet and it is subtle. So I didn't know anything about Marie Lyman, but I, went to the Google to see what I could find. And there wasn't actually a ton either. I did find this incredible photo of her, which is in the archives at the Portland Art Museum, not because it's of her, but because of who photographed her. And I thought, you know what? I bet we would have been friends, or maybe we would have been enemies, but we would have had a lot of feels together. I feel a sense of a sort of kindred spirit in Marie Lyman. Also, apparently a tea drinker. So in my Googling, I found this catalog on eBay that was for a show that she had done, and sweet-talked Marcia into helping me get it. So I also brought that, but I think I probably ought not pass it around. And it's the sweetest, most beautiful book called Delectable Mountains. I have a few screenshots of it here, but I just want to show the craftsmanship. So the photographs are still loose. It's signed, it's dedicated to someone, and it carries with it all of that resonance that I talked about earlier with Glean, of this being an object of care that someone assembled. And there were a couple things in this book that really spoke to me. The first is her connection to Japanese textile traditions, in particular this kind of spiritual garment called a keisa. And she first started making these after a trip to Japan that she took in 1978, which is the year that I was born. So I decided that that was probably pretty important. And these keisa are very unfancy rectangles, about 3 by 5, which is pretty close to the dimension of the textile that I made for Ghost Rose for this show. And they have this kind of stepping stone alternating organization, which feels a lot like quilt sashing to me as well. And she noticed those connections and was really interested in incorporating the use of repetition and really minimal but graphically satisfying geometries. And so she had these robe fragments that she created based off of her exposure and experience with Japanese textiles. And this is what she wrote from her journal in Delectable Mountain. What is this vision? What are these delectable mountains? In my journal, I listed the possibilities. They are a spiritual place, a resting place, the essence of a place, be it Japan or home, the home of the gods, that which we seek. It is difficult to obtain. It is near at hand, but clearly seen only from afar. The simple triangle, an abstract symbol, has become a vehicle by which I can explore regions unknown as well as those known but forgotten. I just really felt a kinship with that way of thinking about object making, about reducing down to the most basic and elemental of forms, and then combining that with really carefully executed handcraft in materials that are traditionally found in domestic spaces, as having something potentially far-reaching and metaphoric and resonant with other people as well. I also just wanted to read a very short bio of Marie Lyman that I came across because she changed her name to Nix, and I also changed my name at a certain point in my adult life. So that also resonated with me. She was a quilt maker, teacher, and textile scholar. As an artist, her work was shown in a number of solo and group exhibitions at regional and national museums, including the Vatican Museum in Rome and the Renwick Gallery. As a teacher at the Oregon College of Art and Craft in the 70s and 80s, Lyman encouraged her students to explore the craft of quilt making and also introduced them to historical quilts. So what I loved about this is Oregon College of Art and Craft is where I learned how to weave when I was in my 20s as a continuing ed student. It's where I took metalsmithing and jewelry making and ceramics. And this is someone that I never met, and yet there is this echo of an intergenerational relationship. So I love this idea of an intergenerational practice that can be biological, that can be generational within a family, that can pass through from teacher to student, or simply by being in the same region, exposed to the same opportunities and communities and spaces across time. The last thing I wanted to talk about is the intimate and the expansive, which is the name for this talk. And this is, so in 2022, I was, I like to say invited. LinkedIn sent me a job posting for an assistant teaching professor for art education at Arizona State University, which I thought was hilarious because my husband is from Arizona. He's sixth generation Arizonan, and he left and had never intended to go back. So I forwarded him that job posting with like a ha 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 ha. And he replied back and said, "Did you actually read this job posting, because they're looking for you?" And so then I looked at it a little bit more closely, and in fact, they were looking for me. Somebody with an active art practice who also had experience in the K-12 teaching world, as well as teaching at the college level. And so we embarked on this crazy adventure that has been our life back and forth between Arizona and Oregon. And through that experience, at least where I'm at in that story right now, is this idea of something tender within something formal and something intimate, but also expansive. And that really comes from the back and forth feeling of being in Arizona with its enormous skies. This is the view from our balcony. And this is just like a Tuesday, you know? Like the sky is breathtaking. It is astonishing. It is terrifying. It is wondrous. And it is very, very different than the experience of being surrounded by the damp and mossy trees here. So I have found that going back and forth between these places has made me look for and feel that sense of the intimate in the expansive, the tiny but meaningful in the large. And my work has gotten a little weirder. It's also gotten a little more colorful. My good buddy Mario Gallucci was just fine with me bringing in an enormous roll of this colored seamless that we use, and mounted a camera to the ceiling so I could bring in these quilt columns. And so my work has gotten more colorful. That's my trusty studio assistant, my daughter there on the left, helping me make sure everything was straight and parallel. It's gotten more experimental. It's gotten more incremental, more repeated tiny elements growing larger in size. I'm more interested in the sense of the immense, but as experienced through the sense of something tiny, digestible, or handheld. So I think of these two pieces, Ghost Rose 1, which is in progress on the left there, and then the tapestry weaving that I've been doing in response to the environment in Arizona, as being this really wonderful iteration of learning about myself and also learning about the world through being in dialogue between these two places, connected through the language of craft and textiles. Thank you. Thank you to Marcia Mack. Big thank you to Marcia Mack for making this magic happen. What an email to get, inviting you to participate in a show like this. Of course, I was immediately like, who else is she asking? Who else is going to be a part of this? And then also a shout out to Sylvia Eden, my daughter, and Betty Anderson, my mother, who are watching via the internet. My husband, Michael Brooks, who in fact did go back to the desert His mother, she never knew she could love me so much as bringing her son back to the desert. Mario Gallucci for incredible photography, and then PNCA for supporting this project and so many other projects that they've supported around the idea of intergenerational practice and what role a institution can have in contributing to that. Okay, questions?
Thank you so much, Carolyn. I can take questions for whoever's ready. Anybody have a question? Okay.
Thanks, Josh.
Hey, would love to learn more about Arizona and Portland. What are the similarities and differences, and how has it affected your art practice?
Yeah. So, man, when I made that initial jaunt, I thought for sure that this was going to be a great adventure, but obviously Oregon was superior than Arizona in every possible way imaginable. And it had been my great shock to discover that there are actually some things that I think maybe they are doing better than we are doing. Okay, one of them is they stay on the same time year round. Can we please just do that? I would really love it if we could all just be on the same time year round. I think the way that the natural environment dictates so much of the lived experience of the place. Also, driving is terrifying in both places. Here because of the weather, the wet roads, the curvy roads. There because the giant white trucks and the 17-lane roads and all of the accident billboards. There's actually an incredible attentiveness to craft in the food scene, but because Phoenix is so enormous, it's not as visible as a part of the city's identity as it is here. It's fascinating there, the difference between a really delicious meal and Applebee's is like $2. Like the price is the same. And also the signage there is kind of derpy. So you cannot judge a restaurant there by its signage, which was shocking to me as coming from Portland. I was ready to judge anybody based on their signage. Those are the first things that come up for me. I will say both places make excellent wine and excellent coffee. Oh, I heard a follow-up here. How does that show up in my art practice? Thank you, Mr. Brooks. So I guess I would say I've made bigger things, and it literally is higher ceilings and all of the sky. And so for whatever reason, that's translated into me wanting to make things that are bigger than my human body. And then also the way so I get ocular migraines, and they've gotten much worse being there. They don't turn into full-blown painful migraines, but they create this shimmer effect. And they are paralyzing in that you kind of have to stop what you're doing and just like surrender to your body until they go away. And that idea of shimmer is something I'm really interested in thematically as like what is on the edge of what you can actually see and focus on. So that's felt like something that's emerged from the Arizona experience thematically that's informing my work. Is that sufficient? Yes, okay, all right.
Hello, thank you for being here. I have another follow-up to the follow-up. I'm wondering how the travel itself affects your art practice and what that looks like.
Yeah, so the Southwest has a lot of direct flights, which is great. So, but what it means is that you really have to think about what you need where and when. So it's actually made me be pretty organized about my materials management. I will say, because I was a very young mother, I didn't have a studio space outside of my living room for most of my adult life. And so I've always had to be pretty tight when it came to being organized with my materials. But I will say there have been quite a few times where I've gone to go look for my favorite snips and realized that they're in another state. So staying really organized, and then the back and forth thing, I mean, we also do it as a drive because our dog doesn't fly, because we're fancy people who aren't going to put their dog in the bottom of a plane. So when we do the drive, we always stop in Ashland, and then we go to Eugene, and then we go to Davis, and then we go to Palm Springs. And so that has become like also this thing that we do where we have the places that we go in those towns that is just not a way that I would have thought about spending my time, but is also, I guess it's made even more rituals out of like our life than were in place beforehand, because I guess I kind of do that no matter what, and it calls for it, and so we're like kind of leaning into that. Yeah. Also, making road sandwiches is itself a work of art. Yeah. Any other questions?
I never ask questions at these things. I'm so happy to see you.
It's great to see you, Michael.
I experienced the spirituality in the margins of what you're talking about. And I know it's a big question, but I'm wondering if you could speak more about the relationship between spirituality and the way that you, especially in terms of how you use craft, is what I'm really trying to get at.
Yeah, I mean, I love that you're making that connection, and I would like to think that the way that spirituality is itself kind of like a shimmer in my practice is something that, because that's true. I mean, I was certainly raised very religious and went to church 3 times a week up until I was fully launched as an adult. And so I was raised with very close attention on the Protestant Christian tradition. And my mom is a deeply religious person who's the seriousness and care with which she approaches her spiritual practice is something that is kind of part of my inheritance, even though I'm not like practicing of a specific religion. I do believe strongly in experiences of the sublime and of a connection to things that are outside of like the lived experience of the time that we have on this particular planet. The nature of the soul, but also the true. I mean, I love Susan Sontag's Against Interpretation for pushing back against this idea of intellectualizing everything and instead having it be about the phenomenological, the lived, felt experience, that is often how we actually access transcendence. And so I guess I feel like maybe I'm dancing around your question a little bit, but it's in those places of overlap that I feel connected to a spiritual tradition or a spiritual practice, certainly in objects of ritual and care that are such a part of so many religious traditions and that I have a great deal of respect for.
Carolyn, I was surprised in your lecture to hear that you're a huge Trailblazers fan. And dovetailing on the spirituality question, I'm curious if you
Yes.
could talk about how that came to be.
Dame's coming home, guys. Dame's coming home. Maybe he should have gone a little bit longer so we could have missed him a little bit more, but we're glad he's coming home. So when I was growing up, I just have to show my Trailblazers tattoo, which is right here, yes. My mother has the same tattoo. My grandmother passed. I would like to think that she would have gotten one, but there's no way in hell. So my grandma would listen or would watch the Trailblazers games, but she did not like the TV announcers. So she would keep the sound off and listen on the radio. And she lived about a 5-minute drive away from our house. But we never watched the games together because in our house, we like to listen to the TV announcers. And so my mom would have this clacker that she would clack, and we would shout. And I mean, it was very much part of the matriarchy. And then when it would be halftime, my grandma would call my mom, and they talk about the game, but never watched it together. So it was just this and that's also like the sort of old school telephone. My grandmother had a pink one, and that is just this access point in so many ways to that relationship is still really meaningful. I will also say my first Blazer game was as a 3rd grader. I won the spelling competition, and I got to go to the Trailblazers game with Amy Rogers. Amy, if you're watching, hope you're doing well. Fellow David Douglas 96 grad. We sat in the back row at the Coliseum with bench seats that like hinged off of the concrete wall. I don't remember parents being there, but surely they must have been. So I think I love the artistry, the playfulness, and the rules of basketball. Ball don't lie. Any final questions? I don't even know where we're at for time.
We're good.
Okay. That's the only sport I can speak on, so please don't ask me about soccer.
Okay. Well, I do have one more question, just getting back into a bit of your practice. I'm curious what your thoughts are on authorship and ownership, specifically because you're so skilled with your hands and in your craft. And I know that you have, like at least in Ghost Rose, you've had a collaboration with your mother, and that your daughter is your best studio assistant. And so I'm curious how you interpret that, how that works into your practice.
Yeah, I mean, I think for a long time I certainly felt that anything that I made that I was showing or selling, like every single last bit of it had to be made just by me. And it wasn't until I was in my late 30s that I started to realize like the cost of that in terms of like, what can this hand do in the time that I have? And so how do I negotiate that? Do I step back from the meticulous execution? I mean, the one on the left, which my daughter named Big Bird, was made with 6,000 raya knots. And, you know, like, I never want to do that again. But I am glad that I did it. And that's the only way that you can get it to look quite like that. And the one on the right, these tapestries are tiny. Because the wool has been naturally dyed with rhubarb that had to be harvested and soaked. And the horsehair came from harvested horsetail, washed in a river, processed, and then, you know, woven on a tapestry loom. So the embedded time is really real, and I have not found a way to simplify that for myself, much as I would like to. So in terms of authorship, I do feel, so I've had, 4 studio assistants that have worked with me on projects over time. In fact, I think all of them except for my daughter, the other 3 I met through PNCA that were grad students that I mentored in some way. And so they were people that I developed relationships with and then had execute specific components of projects that would otherwise be outside of my capacity from a time standpoint. So I guess, I mean, I'm just continuing on making textiles in this moment, and then someone else will be doing it after me. And of course, I want there to be coherence and meaning and value to my work as like a capital A artist. But I also feel a little like at a loss because I think I just can only make work the way that I know how, and it's just not going to be an efficient way. And when I think about Marie Lyman, like how hard it was for me to find information out about her, and the images of her work that I was able to find are all just freaking exquisite. And there are so few of them, and I wonder, where did the rest of her work go? What people knew her, people probably are still around that knew her. And so you know, that maybe that will be me too, but I guess this is just the path that I have to walk to work the way that it feels true to me.
Big is that piece on
Big
the
Bird?
left? Yeah.
It's like 24 by 30. So, yeah. Thank you.
Is there more in that series?
No. That series is called Once and Never Again. No, I do. Unfortunately, the more distance I get, I made it last spring as part of a tapestry class that I was taking. So one thing I didn't mention is in my work at ASU has been the most supportive institution, and I have my master's in art education, but they supported me applying for and getting into the MFA program, and so I'm actually getting my MFA through ASU while simultaneously working there, which is truly insane, but also an amazing opportunity. And so I was taking a tapestry class last spring with Katie Parker, who's a really incredible ceramic artist primarily, but also does textiles, specifically raya. And I don't know, I caught the bug. And I do, so there's gold and silver threads that are along with the wool in each of the knots, and it does create this like really beautiful shimmer that also has this satisfying, it feels really great to stick your hands in it. And I don't know how else that effect can be achieved. Like that's what you get when you do this process. I do think larger scale would be fantastic, but that would be an instance where I would have to design it and have it executed by someone much younger than me.
I'm working on a hand-knotted piece right now, and you're making me want to quit a little bit. I mean, I already wanted to quit, but hopefully I don't. My question is, will you tell us more about the porcelain beads?
Yeah, the porcelain beads. So I'm just going to go back to the beginning to show, because I kind of rushed through that part. My nerves were still acting up at that point. So these porcelain beads they've appeared in quite a few pieces actually in some form or another. And they came out of one piece that I did for a show at Guardino Gallery that was a really large scale rosary that was really intended as a kind of rosary. Only it was for the love song of J. Alfred Prufrock. And so because I used to make my students memorize that poem, I also had it memorized, yes. A lot of it's still living in that brain. But I love the idea of objects that help you stay connected to specific ritualized knowledge. And for me, as a lit major, as an undergrad, that's what like poetry and prose is for me. And so I think the connection to prayer beads, the connection to something that individually, like the patchwork, is individual patchwork square is like on its own doesn't do a lot, but once it's replicated, duplicated, then it creates this visual rhythm and this tactile rhythm. I love the way that these beads are draped. They're not attached to the sculpture in any way. It actually feels like the whole thing feels like it's stable, but it's very light. It can be moved around. And that tenuousness, I think is important to it. I love working with porcelain because it's just so seductive of a material. It's very unforgiving. It can be very unkind, but it also just has a smoothness and a luminosity that nothing else quite does. This it's not a necklace, this ornamentation, we can call it an ornamentation, also has that central medallion that's made out of a much rougher stoneware, and I like the combination of that with the porcelain. My daughter knotted together all of those beads for me, and with her perfect, tiny little young fingers. I do pay her for helping me. Any other questions?
All right. Well, thank you so much, Carolyn.
Thank you, Marcia, and thank you for the wonderful questions. I really appreciate the dialogue.
Mm-hmm.